several years ago. And I've also authored a technology book about artificial intelligence and a lot of stuff that Elon does, including electric cars, self-driving vehicles, how we're going to colonize space, and building a Type 1, Type 2, Type 3 civilization, and a lot of interesting sci-fi stuff and how science fiction is becoming science fact. And I've met Elon several times, and I'm such a big fan of all the work that he does, and I look forward to talking about everything that's going on.
Fantastic, thank you. And I believe the payment company you're doing involves blockchain, and you guys actually leverage crypto, right?
Yeah. So we're like one of the first to accept like Bitcoin and dollars, but now we're like tokenizing currencies and doing some really interesting stuff.
Look forward to hearing about that, especially since a lot of people think maybe Elon was behind Bitcoin. He denies it. Who knows? All right, go ahead, Ryan.
I'm Ryan Borowski. Elon and I followed each other for quite a while on Instagram. We had many public conversations. I've definitely been in all of his stuff, following Tesla, following the stock, following SpaceX, and I really just study all of the wonderful things he does.
What do you do? What do you do?
I do many things, but I run a social media account, a Tesla social media account, Tesla Motors Club. So I've been engaged in the community for a very long time. Right now, I just I'm the VP of marketing at an aftermarket accessories company, RPM Tesla.
That's what I do. Awesome. So my name's Eli. I used to work for SpaceX until one day Elon handed me the spacesuit and asked me to climb inside of his Roadster, and the rest has been history ever since then. So, no, actually, my name is Eli Barton. I am the creator of a comic book series called The Adventures of Starman. It basically documents what happened with the Falcon Heavy launch and Starman getting launched into space in Elon Musk's red Tesla Roadster. It really struck me that that whole event was pretty much something that you get out of science fiction or comic books, so let's make a comic book universe out of it. So that's how I ended up here today. What else I do, my other passion project is I run a Tesla owners community called My Tesla Adventure. We go around the state of California and around the globe doing adventure-focused events for Tesla owners, and the whole objective is to get people out of their house, in their cars, and enjoying nature, while also building community at the same time. So I'm super honored and humbled to be here today as the moderator of this panel. This panel is on Elon Musk building the future, about his ideas and visionary projects. My job today is actually to talk as little as possible and let our very esteemed guests share their perspectives and give us some insight to what Elon's done, what he's doing currently, and where the world is heading as a result. So thank you guys all so much for joining us, and let's give a round of applause for our esteemed guests. Awesome. So to kick this off, I think the past is prologue, and that's really an important place to start. So especially since there's a lot of folks in this room who aren't familiar with how Elon Musk got started, let's go all the way back to the early days with PayPal. And Ryan or Tanish, which one of you would like to start with kind of telling the PayPal story? Would you like to do the PayPal story?
So Elon Musk was fresh out of college, and he had a company before called Zip2. It was a mapping company. It was basically getting businesses online so that there was no internet. It was very pre-internet. So they built a way where companies can get online and people can kind of find out where the business is, physical location is. It also gave a little brief description about the business. It was kind of like when you search a company on Google, there's this little thing that pops up on the right-hand side. It's basically equivalent to that, and it even shows a map, and it was obviously very, very HTML-like, but...
And for anybody who has a business in this room or search businesses, this is the experience that you now experience on Google for that standard card that he's talking about. That started actually with Elon Musk when he was doing with Zip too. Really foundational technologies on the internet actually began there. So go on.
And so that progressed. So he started his business-minded aspect like that, and then he progressed onto PayPal, which was very, very big deal at the time. He started PayPal. It was originally just to send friends money and other people money over the internet, so you didn't have to mail checks. It was a big deal, mailing checks. It was a very time-consuming process. So you were able to send money to friends or family instantly with an email address. And then it grew very big, charging small fees. And then the company ended up being sold to eBay for $2 billion? $2 billion. And so everybody got a nice fat check. And that's a very broad way of saying it, but yeah.
Well, everybody includes some famous names, like Peter Thiel.
Yes.
And
Let me think. What is it, 12 people?
yeah, well, something
PayPal
like that.
Mafia, as they're
The
known.
PayPal Mafia.
Yeah, right.
Well, there's obviously Elon Musk. Kimball was associated with Zip2, along with investors. Peter Thiel. Was Larry Page? Do you know if he
No, not Larry
invested?
Page.
Did he invest in PayPal though?
I don't think so.
David.
My connection with Larry Page is through a cousin. So.
But there were many founders. So the creators of YouTube were in there.
Yes.
LinkedIn as well.
LinkedIn.
So actually, David, I'd love to hear your take on PayPal and the founders and how we got there.
Yeah, please.
Oh, I don't really know an awful lot about that. Go on, please.
Yeah. So Elon's vision between of starting PayPal originally started with this X.com, and which eventually became PayPal, was he wanted to create internet money that would solve a big problem. To him, when Elon was in college, he was looking at what his vision was in life, and as a young child, Elon always talks about how he was bullied a lot, and like he kind of found escape in science fiction. And so science fiction sort of set his mindset of what he wanted to do in his life, and he wanted to kind of build companies that would be transformative for humanity and protect our species. And one of the books, or a series of books that really was interesting to him, was the Foundation series by Isaac Asimov, who's probably one of the most inspiring science fiction authors ever. And the Foundation series is a series of books that basically talks about a species like intergalactic humans, and how humanity has colonized multiple planets all across the universe. And what's really interesting about that is it sort of inspired people like George Lucas and a lot of people. And what this relates to Elon Musk is he wanted to build companies that will transform him as a person and give him the ability to have the capital, the resources, and the wealth to make science fiction like science fact. And so one of the problems he kind of figured out was he kind of knew his vision of what he wanted to do in his life and how he wanted to make humanity interplanetary. But to do that, he realized he'd have to solve a lot of problems to get there, and one of them was the reason behind starting PayPal, I think it was just initially to make a lot of money and transform the way people move money around the world. But after he sold PayPal for I think like $1.6 billion, he made like $180 million. And that's when he realized, this is the time that I have the opportunity to build companies that will transform how we get to an interplanetary species. And so part of that is why he invested in Tesla, and he started SpaceX and Solar City, which is all, it comes together, I'll talk about it a little bit later, but it's all about building the technologies needed to colonize other planets. So obviously solar power is very important to...
Let me jump in real quick and ask a question to the audience. How many of you in here have a PayPal account, Venmo, Square Cash, any one of the digital transfer cash apps? So pretty much everybody, and I'm in the same boat, by the way, I have all three. So prior to Elon Musk coming along and doing PayPal, nobody had really taken this idea seriously that we could transfer currency digitally, and with credit works great for point of sale transactions, but from going from person to person, you want to split a bar tab, you had a meal, you had a cab, there wasn't a solution for that. And actually most of the solutions on the market today are derivatives of PayPal, and several, even like Venmo, for example, PayPal even owns. So it's actually a really simple technology from the standpoint that we take for granted, but it was very transformative and really just the beginning of where Elon was headed. And that's something that even I, who got into following him later with Tesla and SpaceX, I didn't even realize how much that everything I had done on the internet was fueled by this backbone that Elon had built. It's pretty incredible. Awesome. David, would you like to jump in? I'd love to hear your take.
Yeah, well, first off, a quick riff on that, and that is that there were other approaches, and there are other approaches being developed. M-Pesa, for instance, you should look up on it. There's a whole 60 Minutes thing you should watch about how in Kenya, everybody uses this M-Pesa system through their phones to pay for, thank you, to pay for things. And the bankers of the world were determined to crush it, so it has not spread from Kenya across the rest of Africa. But in any event, I'm certainly not going to belittle what they accomplished with PayPal. It's just interesting how it spread in various directions. By the way, I'm on the board of advisors for a number of blockchain ICOs, and I'm the guy who urges all the young whippersnappers to stay out of jail. First off, the Foundation series, which inspired a great many people, from Paul Krugman to, shut that off, from Paul Krugman, the famous Nobel Prize-winning economist, New York Times columnist, all the way to the leader of the Aum Shinrikyo cult, who nerve-gassed the Tokyo subway, and the Unabomber who personally sent me a copy of his new book. So, in any event, I'm a bit of an expert on Isaac and his universe because I'm the one who tied all the loose ends together in a novel called Foundation's Triumph, in which I tied together the loose ends that Isaac left from Foundation's Edge, all the clues that he left, all the way to obscure titles like Pebble in the Sky. And
real quick, David, for the audience, can you fill people in kind of on the Selden Crisis and psychohistory and what the high-level arc is of the Foundation series?
How many of you need a fill-in on the Foundation series? All right, the Foundation series is Isaac Asimov had two great universes. One was fairly near future, we get robots, and so the 3 laws of robotics. And I think the Will Smith movie was actually not as bad as people say. It just basically compressed all the next 10,000 years into 1 year. The Foundation series is set in a galactic empire 20,000 years in the future. There are no robots. But there is a science of psychohistory that treats individual humans as gas molecules, and you can predict the grand sweep of history. Tying those together was, I think, Isaac's greatest mistake, but it meant that I wrote the sequel because I understood why he tied them together. Robots wind up being responsible for there being no robots. Okay. Now dialing in on Elon, what he's always had a knack for is the ability of knowing where the mental block is. For example, when he started Tesla, he started small enough so a person with $100 million could do it. He took Lotuses and the basic body of Lotuses, ripped them out, and he understood that the motors had come and the batteries had come. Nobody else understood this. That the rare earth motors had a non-linear leap in their capabilities. And so he created his first Tesla was a roadster, because everyone had in their mind the putt-putt image. I was an official in the clean air car race from MIT to Caltech in 1970. We helped to get the lead out of gasoline. It may be the most important thing I ever did in all my life, and I did it at 19. And minor role. The electric cars, when we were pulling in Pasadena, the electric cars were, and it had the world's first hybrid. That was another important thing from that race. The electric cars were arriving in Worcester, Massachusetts. So electric vehicles had a really low reputation. By making it a sports car that rammed you into the seat, he killed within 1 year the major mental block against electric vehicles. Now that was stunningly brilliant. To make that plateau that he was at pay for itself through sales of the Roadster, that was brilliant. So that he was then in a position to say, all right, here's this revolution. Now let's plant people in the back of the seat, starting with luxury cars, not starting with a low-level car. Because the luxury cars will be subsidized by the status symbol aspect, and then that plateau can pay for itself. Now, did it pay for itself? No. But it paid for itself enough so that as he developed SpaceX, he was able to juggle and have his companies bail each other out of horrible crises that would have killed anything else. So, making it so that each of his, and there was one month there when they both needed bailing out and there was nothing to be had. And a parallel universe that's very easily accessible. All you have to do is kind of go like this. No, like this. And you can get into the universe where Elon is a memorable joke. But luck is an added factor. So it's actually fascinating to see how his methodology works. And of course, what happens when you get adulation is you have to worry about the effects on your own psychology of adulation. And in the last year or so, Elon has been having some stumbles by believing his press. But he does like to surround himself with people who question him. And I like to think I'm on that list, though I try to limit the degree to which I would make him mad. I know other billionaires on a first-name basis, and that's the one I really want to keep. So there are other aspects, but I think I'll pass it along.
Sure. So Elon Musk runs a number of different companies actively. The main ones that get the most press are Tesla and SpaceX. There's some that are running behind the scenes, which we don't hear a lot about until they make big breakthroughs, which is Neuralink. Also the Boring Company, which got some press recently for the recent unveiling. Let's jump into one of the two big simultaneous companies that Elon's been running the longest is Tesla and SpaceX. So Ryan, can you fill us in about kind of SpaceX's background, what their mission is, and how they fit into Elon's broader master plan?
So SpaceX started off with a very, very tiny budget for a rocket company. With that tiny budget, they built the Falcon 1, which their goal with the Falcon 1 was to bring it to Mars and plant a tiny greenhouse on there and totally blow the public's mind. But instead, after the fourth launch, which was successful, they brought a government satellite into space. Was it a government satellite? Do you know? I forgot which satellite, or maybe that was 3, the one that failed. But
it was a satellite.
They brought a satellite into space.
We know that for sure.
So that went up into space, and it was huge. It was the first private company to launch a satellite into space successfully. After that, they got a $1 billion deal with NASA to send the Dragon capsule up to the space station to bring supplies up there. Which has been going successful for a very long time. And then Dragon 2 actually just launched successfully up to space and is back down successfully. No failures.
That's Crew Dragon.
Crew Dragon, yes.
Yeah, so there was been a dozen Dragons up to
yes.
Dragon as cargo deliverers.
Yes.
I feel like that's why Elon named them the Dragon capsules, so we just sit here talking about all these dragons going into space. All we need now is the laser beams attached. So we're like one bad day away from the sharks with freaking laser beams attached to their heads. Go on.
So the Dragon is a project that worked out very well. Now they are flying the Falcon 9. 2012 was the first launch of the Falcon 9. And that successfully launched satellites into space. So the business model is bringing satellites up into space for customers at a very low rate because the rocket is reusable. The Block 5, which is the body of the Falcon 9, comes back down to Earth and is repaired and then brought back up into space. So the rocket's reusable, which makes flight travel very inexpensive. And that basically wrong.
No one was using the research from the Conestoga and some of the earlier developments regarding ships that can go up and land themselves vertically, and certainly United Space sabotaged launch away from losing everything.
Yep.
But you know, those who claim that government never has an imagination, well, during the Obama administration, NASA stepped up and bit off the hands that were trying to control them from United Launch Technologies, and they said, we're going to subsidize, we're going to give, and this is the historical parallel is the mail delivery contracts back in the 1920s that were given to a wide variety of proto-airlines during what was called the barnstorming era. And that's the parallel that we're aiming towards, and we're about to hit the 2020s, a century later. And that is that government remained essential because during the 1920s, government made the airports, government made the roads that led to the airports, government gave the subsidies in the form of mail delivery contracts. And yet, there was not the fear, deadly fear of death that we got with the Challenger in Columbia, because government has to check off all the safety boxes. But during the barnstorming era, you bought your own plane. And if you broke your neck, it was considered to be too bad, but it was your neck. The question is, are we entering, 100 years later, the equivalent of the barnstorming era in which zillionaires like Howard Hughes then are willing to subsidize cool things and break their necks if necessary? And this would bring us into a more risk-taking era that really moves us ahead. I also have a scene about billionaires risking their necks in my novel Existence.
So one of the things I think David did a good job alluding to, my mic is on. One of the good things that David did a good job alluding to was the why behind SpaceX. So why, like, there's other rocket companies out there, the United Launch Alliance, there's Boeing, there's all these groups that are going into space. So why did Elon need to go and do SpaceX? You know, there's an ultimate mission, which is to make humans a multi-planetary species and get humans on Mars. But the problem that needed to be solved was getting to space needed to be cheaper. Launches coming out of ULA are costing $1 billion, and there's a variety of different prices depending on the payload, but they were costing way too much money. And we had a perfect situation of private enterprise had a partnership with government, and there was no incentive to innovate. They had these fat government contracts, and they could continue putting up rockets into space for unbelievably bloated cost, and there was nothing to drive it down. Well, Elon saw that and said, look, if I can reduce the cost of getting to orbit by 1/10 of what it costs today, if I can create the delivery vehicle, I can open up space. We can incentivize other private industry that's going to develop further technologies. We can take advantage of the space and ultimately get to Mars because we're going to make space affordable. And that was the real mission behind SpaceX. And it's the reason why the landing of the first booster, the simultaneous dual landing of the boosters of the Falcon Heavy was such a major accomplishment, because this is this new era of space where we're no longer just going to make these super expensive rockets and throw away. Now we're thinking about the economics. Now we're thinking about, it's no longer taking $100 million measures for a incremental increase in safety. It's about how do we reliably deliver a product to space at scale. And I mean, SpaceX can't make rockets fast enough to meet the needs of their customers now, and ULA is terrified. And one of the things that David said, it created an entire new era that was started by Elon initially, but we even have Jeff Bezos also doing, yes, I'm glad there's a few giggles in the room. Private space is growing, and it's the new players in it that are going to be the biggest movers. But one of the things I want to transition to is one of the little-known projects that Elon Musk is doing that doesn't get the most amount of press, probably because it's the least understood, but long-term is going to probably have one of the biggest impacts to our everyday lives, is Neuralink. Natish, I know you're very familiar with this space. Could you share with us kind of the background of Neuralink? Why, one of the most important things is why Neuralink, where we're headed, and what that's going to mean for us in the future.
Sure. So first and foremost, I don't think I talked about this, but to give you a little background about me, when I was in college, I used to work on research on brain-machine interfaces. And one of the systems that we worked on was something called the P300, and it's like an EEG cap that you put on your head. But you could do a lot of cool things with it. And one of the things you could do was you could literally type, so people that have ALS, like people like Stephen Hawking, for instance, could literally type using the system. There's actually a professor that actually teaches and does his course, he plans this beforehand, and he can type just using the power of his thought. And so this is a really cool system, but it only works, it has very limited capabilities. And the reason Neuralink is so important is it's sort of like the missing link. And the reason Elon Musk started Neuralink was, you have to go back and look at AI. So Elon Musk really believes that we're approaching a time when, in the next decade, 20, 30 years from now, we'll reach the technological singularity and artificial intelligence will far surpass the collective intelligence of the human species. And so he says it's sort of like a doomsday scenario. And keeping in line with that, he realizes the only way for humans to survive is to merge with the machines. And to merge with the machines, you're going to have to build some sort of interface to connect the human brain to machines. So if you want to create mind uploading, if you want to create a merger of humans and machines where you can operate neural prosthesis, for instance, robotic arms and all that, you're going to need some sort of new technology and interface to do that. And so when he started Neuralink, the idea was, how do you create a company that will enable you to control all these devices, and you're going to have to do something that's having the mindset of an outsider coming into a new industry and figure out what is the missing gaps in there, right? And so the idea was originally was, well, why don't we use silicon, nanowires or something like that? We got to develop technology that's 10, 20 years out to do this. But in fact, he recently, when I spoke to him, he was talking about there might be a way to do this, he was saying, just through the bloodstream. So he thinks in the next decade, maybe even less than 20 years, Neuralink could have the ability that we could literally use nanotechnology and go through the bloodstream to interface the human brain and to or machines to our neurons. And I think that's going to be incredibly fascinating what we can do with that. So that opens up new things. For instance, you take so much information from the visual cortex, and that's how we see the world. But imagine if you could shut down the visual cortex, and now you can be living in full immersion virtual reality, and you can literally go into a different world and escape. And so that's the kind of things you could potentially do with this kind of technology.
So what we're talking about here is quite literally like the Matrix. We're talking about a direct wire, a plug of some sort between our brains and the computer. So raise your hand if you think of the idea of plugging yourself into a computer seems crazy. Okay, a few people. You guys are actually less skeptical than most audiences. Normally it's 100%. Everybody says this is a terrible idea.
I have a question.
Sure, one second. Let me finish this one and I'm going to be happy to answer it. So for those of you who raise your hand and it sounds crazy, think about what you do currently with your laptops and your cell phones. What a lot of our lives revolve around now, we are interfacing with computers, we're interfacing with the internet. We're just doing it in a way that's very inefficient. We're having to do it with our fingers and our hands and our keyboards. What we're talking with Neuralink is accelerating that interaction by being able to do it on a cognitive level, going wire to wire, instead of having this very slow process of having to give inputs with our hands. So, we're not fully wirely plugged in yet, but I don't know many people who can't get a function in life and or accomplish what they need to without being attached to that computer system. So really Neuralink is about speeding up the rate at which we can exchange data between systems that we're already doing with our thumbs. Go ahead, you have a question.
So, two things related in terms of the question. So there's already technology, I have it all over my house to control my computer systems and do a lot of things with my voice. I have Alexas turning on the lights and doing all kinds of stuff. The concern I have with the Neuralink idea is the meld of the nanotechnology and the biology. I have a lot of reservations about whether we have sufficient understanding of the working of the brain and human nervous system to add nanotechnology to the mix without damaging something. And that's why I think right now, at least, it's a crazy idea. Can you talk to that a little bit?
I can't speak to specifics of nanotechnology, but and there's multiple ways to go about this, by the way, that don't necessarily involve nanotech. I think that's just one of the paths, but David, go ahead.
Yeah, well, there are a couple of things to put it into perspective. There's no answer to your question, but there's a couple of things. First off, You all familiar with Moore's law, the notion of the doubling rate of all the computational ability because of hardware. It's long been predicted that Moore's law would S-curve over and start to fail. That prediction has come true already across the last 5 years. But in what I've been calling the big flip, the last 5 years happens to be the period during which software, which has sucked for 70 years, I'm sorry, I said that wrong. Forgive me, but that was a bit crude. Which has sucked for 70 years, has taken off spectacularly through learning systems. So we're getting the advances, it's just less through hardware than through software, and this is, in my novel Existence, I posit that this is probably what happened to us 40,000 years ago, at the beginning of a chain of software revising the renaissances. Now, the point is that those who have said that we are about to have AI, like Ray Kurzweil, and he's an optimist, so he believes we'll go along for the ride. This is Elon's aim. Elon's not an optimist, but he certainly wants this, and that is that we go along for the ride. The notion is that AI would become equivalent to us when the number of flip-flops in a box is equivalent to the number of neurons in a human head. Well, that was past 5, 6, 7 years ago. 10 billion, 100 billion neurons. Then they said, well, it's the number of synapses. So there's hundreds to even thousands per neuron. And these are the flashy bits. So that makes sense. Okay, it's the flashy things that turn on and off that are the equivalent, only they're highly nonlinear and murky, so they're not like a bit, they're more like several bytes or more of information. And there's trillions of those. And so now they're talking 2025, something like that, when Moore's law would reach that point. Now we're realizing that for every synapse, there's dozens to hundreds, possibly thousands, of little tiny organelles along the dendrites and inside the neurons that are obviously involved in some kind of computation, but it's murky and nonlinear. So it's not like flip-flops at all. It's kind of like murky voting and all of that. And if that's what you have to model, now you're not going to be in time to save me. Maybe you. Probably only her, but she's the only one in the room who will deserve it anyway. So anyway, that's a little tutorial to bring you up to date on just one aspect of this problem. And there are so many more, like Roger Penrose. Oh, by the way, sign up for UCSD's Arthur C. Clarke Center for Human Imagination. Get on the mailing list. There were 2 great events just in the last month. There's a great event next month. Freeman Dyson, Roger Penrose. His hypothesis with a guy named Hameroff is that there are little tiny elements inside our neurons that do quantum entanglement and therefore might be able to do quantum computational effects, in which case the bets are off.
And we're still not even, I mean, we've only recently had the first successful quantum computing chip, which was doing like the effect equivalent of like, what, 16 bytes? IBM's chip. I got lucky. I'm sure you got to interact with that chip, right? I'm sure they invited you.
No, they don't want me anywhere near it.
I got to know it, yes.
Oh, nice.
But to answer the question you asked about the risks, the thing is about science is it's the greatest human accomplishment we've ever had, but it's still relatively rudimentary in how we apply it. And I say that because we actually don't understand the risks about a lot of the medical technologies and breakthroughs that we've already had that are mostly pharmaceutical. Like if you look at the way we do testing, we're just looking at outcomes. And we're looking at saying, okay, this drug, this procedure, this thing results in a statistically significant better outcome this often of the time. And pharmaceuticals is a perfect example. You know, things that treat depression, which has been, you know, really important breakthroughs and something that people deal a lot with in the modern era. We don't really know how they work. but we know that these things have a significant increase in improving depression for people that battle them, and the advancements of nanotech and these things is going to be no exception. We're going to do tests, we're going to see positive outcomes, the net is going to be a net positive outcome, and we're going to deploy that. And maybe 50 or 100 years from now, we'll understand the way these nanotechnologies work the same way, hopefully 100 years from now, we understand how all the pharmaceuticals work that we use right now. It's kind of part of that evolutionary curve, but yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. When we launch this and people start using this, we're not going to know all the downsides. Again, the same way the medications we take right now, we don't know all the downsides. Things that are FDA approved and that there's a variety of people in this room that take for different conditions. I mean, if anybody in here takes blood pressure medication, like, we don't know all the long-term consequences of taking those for 30 or 40 years because we haven't had those drugs for 30 or 40 years. So we're going to find out. Go ahead.
They had blood pressure medication like 50 years ago.
Sure, but some of the more modern ones that we're taking, though, but the ones that people are taking today have not existed for 30 or 40 years. But and that's part of the reason why the new ones have gotten better, that we've learned from the past. The last one I kind of want to cover of the Elon Musk mission, which we didn't talk much about before I open up to questions, is Tesla. Tesla's by far the most known Elon Musk brand. And the entire vision behind this company was to kickstart the electric vehicle revolution. Elon actually never expected Tesla to be successful and even to still be around today. The point was to push the rock far enough, up the hill or over the hill that it would start rolling. Tesla actually only started because GM crushed their electric car program. That was kind of the catalyst that led to, who killed the electric car? General Motors. That was actually the catalyst that led to Tesla. So the fact that Tesla's now in a place that they've delivered on the Roadster, they've delivered on the Model S, they've delivered on the Model X, the Model 3 just went on sale for $35,000. The Model Y is going to get unveiled on next Wednesday, which, by the way, super excited to take a ride in. The whole arc.
So to an extent, it's already mission accomplished.
It is. It's mission accomplished. The objective of the company was to transition the world to sustainable energy, and their big push is to get cars running off batteries that ultimately can be charged from solar and sustainable energy instead of fossil fuels. Yeah, it's mission accomplished. I mean, the game's over. You can't go back from electric now.
Yeah, quick anecdote. I've been pushing three-letter agencies and all sorts of things about some of our society's vulnerabilities, and one of them is that we have over 1 million solar-roofed homes and businesses, and if you envision a situation like a post-apocalyptic situation like I envisioned in The Postman, it would be different because you'd have millions islands of light out there, even if all the electric network had gone down. Wrong. You who have solar roofs, they shut down in a blackout because the electric companies are a bunch of troglodyte idiots who can't think of another way to protect their linemen from spurious voltages, when they could easily have made a little switch that would take your solar voltage and feed it to just 3 outlets in your house to run your fridge and some lights and the rechargers for all the neighborhood. I've kvetched about this everywhere, and I kvetched to Elon about it, and he said, I'll fix it. And he brought out the Powerwall. And I'm going, it costs $5,000. How about selling us a switch? He said, the price will go down.
And a lot of the power companies don't really let you have that switch.
Well, actually, the latest I've heard is that some of the power companies are starting to sell that switch.
That's good.
And as usual,
they weren't PG&E.
As usual, I never have any idea if I was responsible. These things percolate around. Let's open things up for a couple of questions.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
What happened to the greenhouse on Mars?
Who wants to answer that?
I'll answer. The greenhouse actually never made it. It was just, they figured that it would be more cost effective to launch a satellite into orbit before they launched it.
Well, they were going to buy a rocket from the Russians.
From the Russians.
And the Russians proved to be assholes, and you don't treat Elon that way. He basically says, I'll compete with you.
Yeah, so the Russians really got it coming back. So they actually had a rocket that was designed to compete with the Falcon 9, and they just closed it down. They canceled the program because they can't win any business. So it looks like Elon got the last word on that. But yeah, no, Elon, before he started SpaceX, he went to go to Russia and try to get them to sell him a rocket. He had the money. They laughed at him. So now he's laughing in their face.
I'd say put him in the White House, except there's 5% that he's crazy is effective. Whereas the 95% crazy we've got now, it has the saving grace of being utterly drooling incompetent.
You can't be president.
He's not there. Yeah, he's not
That's right. That's right.
Trust me, we want Elon in private enterprise. You don't want the title. Go ahead, you got a question.
It'd be a waste.
Total waste.
So, just for my own edification, we have to get off the planet because the sun's going to explode? Is that the ultimate long-term plan?
It wouldn't help
So
going to
it's-
Mars.
No, I
Yeah.
understand.
No.
But, I mean, but ultimately, the Isaac Asimov Foundation is getting far enough away.
It's terminus. The point of Mars would be to be terminus. It's to create a outpost of humanity that, if this planet ultimately doesn't make it, that the civilization can still continue. That's the real gist.
Well, we're going to get further than that. But right, okay. So
Mars is just the beginning.
Because otherwise we could be, if we're being sustainable here, being sustainable is just so that we can stepstone out.
Well,
because if we're not sustainable long enough, we won't ever get out.
So and he's kind of doing both veins at the same time, right? So it's fixing sustainable energy on Earth, hoping we can bring this back from the brink at which he sees that we're headed, but at the same time, that may not happen. So that's why I think there's such a ridiculously hard push that he's trying to get to Mars as fast as possible, knowing that the efforts he believes that the efforts to save things on Earth may not be possible. And that's part of the whole psychohistory and how these forces kind of move together. But his objective would be to improve our life on Earth, extend that here, and do Mars. But he's doing both at a very rapid rate because he believes there's a chance that there may not be a comeback for the planet.
Is there any chance we're a virus and it's not a good idea?
Well, I mean, if we are a virus, our job is to make sure that we survive. So we're doing a pretty damn good job at it so far. But and honestly, it's all a matter of perspective, right? It's a
jerk question, but
it's a great philosophical idea to kind of throw around because to somebody else's perspective, we very well could be. Go ahead.
Just to talk about the two other projects that might seem minor, like the Hyperloop and the Boring Company, and I want to know how that is attached to the master plan.
Awesome. Who wants to jump on the Hyperloop Boring Company?
Well, I wouldn't say it's really, I mean, it's sort of part of the master plan, but it's sort of not. It's more of solving Elon's personal problems.
Yep,
so,
there we go. Soul-crushing
So,
traffic.
like, Elon Musk has a house in Bel Air, SpaceX is all the way in, like, Hawthorne. It's a long commute on the 405, like, the busiest highway. He's like, let's build tunnels under LA. So that's sort of his idea behind that.
No, this is not a joke. This was literally, he goes back, like, he loses hours in traffic going from SpaceX to his home, like, 10 miles away. And he'd much rather be spinning and building his rockets, and was like, holy shit, we can build some tunnels. And it doesn't have to just be my private underground James Bond tunnel from my house to SpaceX. I can actually help other people with this too. But really it started with he hates traffic, and it's crazy enough and has the ability to solve that.
And I would expand on Hyperloop. It's because, you know, Tesla's headquartered in like Palo Alto and he lives in LA, and so that's a long commute to take a private jet. I mean, it's like an hour. But he goes with Hyperloop, we can do that in substantially shorter amount of time, and more people could potentially travel between long distances. And so that solves another personal problem, and it makes the cost of travel probably 10x cheaper.
And it gets a lot of personal, so the whole idea that everybody moving around in personal transportation is really inefficient. It's not great. Like, even when we get to a point where we're running off solar and all this stuff, like, still everybody driving around their own cars is not effective or efficient, not a great way to move around mass amounts of people. Hyperloop gives us the ability to move a lot of people very quickly with a very small amount of energy consumed. And that's also part of the whole green movement and consuming less energy. Go ahead, we got a question.
What's the current status and next step for Starlink?
Who wants to jump on Starlink? David,
they're planning to start launching pretty soon.
Well, they got the first two out there.
Yeah. One of the things that you should have such problems is that Elon, by recovering his launch vehicles, is going to have an excess of launch vehicles during the next year, and that is amazing. and this is of course the year that Branson is going to move his spaceships 1 and 2 out to New Mexico, the spaceport in New Mexico, and Bezos is going to start doing his thing in less jocular, oh, isn't that cute little ways. So it's going to be a very interesting thing as we run up to the 2020s.
To the Starlink thing, I don't know if you saw the news about 3-4 months ago. Elon went and actually terminated pretty much all the executives running, the head of projects, the head of engineers running Starlink, because they wanted to do like several more entire versions of iteration before they got to the production model. He said, no, sorry, fired all of them. They were all, top engineers in their field, replaced them from people who SpaceX, who understand how to work with Elon, which is you deliver on the objective. So I think those extra launch vehicles, I think we're going to see SpaceX probably beat the rest of the competition to having this internet-based Nash probably by about a year. That's my estimation.
There are geopolitical aspects to this and philosophical aspects. Elon is a libertarian, though he is also like most of the tech billionaires, much in favor of a fairly flat society. Well, how do you do that when you're pulling in the money?
And firing people that don't agree with you.
Who are standing in the way of getting your goals accomplished? He's not going to be worrying about these guys being able to get jobs. The field that he's pioneering is creating a form of internet that can get past the Chinese firewall. Yep. So we're talking about an extremely powerful redemption of the internet dream. And the internet dream was that it would empower individuals all over the planet. And the enemies of that dream haven't, across the last 10, 15 years, figured out how to do an end run around that dream. One of them was to take over America. But the other is to find ways of turning the internet within China and some other places into a force for homogenization. Look up social credit.
The impact of the Starlink thing is actually really substantial. So this is going to be the Internet 3.0. We're talking about a truly democratized internet that is no longer ground-based, which means you wrangle away control from these historic monopolies who pretty much control. I mean, most places in the United States, we have one of 2 telco providers to choose from, and usually it's all somehow back to AT&T. I mean, they're throttling our speeds at both ends. They're completely cooperative with the government, whatever they want to do in monitoring traffic. This is about taking internet to the skies in the place that cannot physically be touched. And thankfully we have somebody doing that who wants to level the playing field for the rest of us. But that's going to be one of those things that when that finally hits and that goes global, the world economies aren't going to be ready for what the impacts of that are going to be. Yeah, it's going to be really exciting.
Is the timeline still 5 years?
That's what they're saying publicly. I think they may actually be a little bit ahead of it on this one. And somebody made a comment about firing people who don't agree with you. It's not that so much. It's firing what Elon does is fires people who say they can't do it. If you say you can't deliver on the mission, you can't deliver it on time, he'll find somebody who will.
Well,
for sure.
The safety thing is what they were going against to them for safety.
It depends on which project, but gotcha. Go ahead.
Does he realize that there are a lot of unintended consequences to some of these things? I mean,
progress.
Internet will be free, but then all the bad guys can access it too. So, who's going to win out when that kind of a negative side of things comes out?
The bad guys are already on the internet, everywhere. In fact, like they're making a lot of money on the internet, and some of the bad guys are the internet providers themselves now. So this is taking the henchmen out of running the machine.
There are ways you defeat bad guys, and it's called accountability. I have a book called The Transparent Society about that, and the problem that distinguishes the internet from the previous 5 arenas that made us wealthy and gave us everything. Markets, democracy, science, justice, courts, and sports. These are all competitive, and they are umpired. The left has been taught to hate the word competition. The right has been taught to hate the word regulation, when it is only regulated competition that has ever gotten us anywhere. And the internet has none. The internet does not have a ritual call to combat in which you can be defeated. So bad ideas, you defeat a bad idea on this one blog comment section, and you go, ha ha, it's dead. No. It is not dead. All right, memes go on and on and on and on, unless you come up with a way to kill them. And bad products die in markets. Bad policies die in democracy. They're supposed to. Bad theories die in science. You know, the wrong person is, the bad guy is supposed to lose in courts. We have none of that on the internet. That's a more important innovation than Starlink.
One last comment before we shut this down to add to what David just said. The internet actually has the capability